Hello, welcome to the Cure Chronicles. I'm your host, Jeff Galvin. I'm excited to be joined today by Daniel Driffin, a dedicated HIV, AIDS, and LGBTQ plus activist. Since he was diagnosed in 2008 with HIV, Daniel has dedicated his life to working at the intersection of advocacy and assisting communities affected by HIV. He co-founded Thrive Support Services, a patient advocacy and social support network for Black, gay men living with HIV, and gained much public attention after speaking at the 2016 Democratic National Convention, where he reintroduced conversations about HIV awareness, education, and testing on a national scale. Daniel has been recognized by the National Black Justice Coalition as one of the top 100 Black LGBTQ SGL emerging leaders to watch, and is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in public health from Georgia State University. Welcome to the show, Daniel. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm super happy to be here.
Well, amazing background. And, one thing that really stands out, what was it like to speak at the Democratic National Convention? I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
No, it was a great opportunity. I think the time met the importance, especially as we think about the lasting impact and lasting disparities that we continue to see with HIV across our nation. So I was happy to bring the opportunity to lift up the importance of testing, treatment, and ultimately stigma reduction opportunities.
Yeah, it's remarkable, really, how HIV has kind of fallen out of the public consciousness. And of course, COVID pushed it down even more. But it seemed to me that it had a kind of taken, a back seat to just life. That somehow when you went out to the general population, and even when I talk to people, they think it's already cured, which is remarkable to me, right? I mean, the advancements have been incredible, right? These long-lasting, injectable forms and things like that. The convenience factor is high. The side effects have been consistently lowered, but it's really not cured. You can't say it's cured. People still consider it in their lives. What do you think the major impact of HIV is on its victims? And I hate to even say victims. I mean, that's extreme. But, when somebody's living HIV positive, what are the added stresses or inconveniences or whatever that they have to endure that could be removed by a real one and done cure?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. And I love even within your question, you went back and found better language, right? Because I think even as we have seen the progression of modern medication, it provides additional space for folks to thrive and truly tap into like an improved quality of life. So I think language is always important.
Yeah.
I think continuing on in the question, a one and done again taps into that quality of life. I think it is the ultimate stigma removal, especially as people living with HIV or those individuals who are most vulnerable to HIV. Because I think we see, taking medication and staying in care once you find the best doctor, the best medical team, care can be achieved, right? It's the things that create the entire health. So those things like between you and I, we call them structural determinants of health. So how important housing plays into being healthy, how important mental health plays into being healthy, how important access to insurance and access to positive support structures. All of that truly builds in the person to be the healthiest that they can be. So I think truly adding an additional point like a cure, I think that would be just an additional additive for folks to be the healthiest that they can be with and not having to worry about HIV. Again, I think that would be huge.
Yeah. You talk about the stigma and, so what is the stigma surrounding HIV? Because when you think about it, somebody who's well controlled on antiretrovirals is no different than anybody else. They are no danger to the people around them, and they're living a relatively normal life. There may be some inconveniences, I get it, but it's not operable, right? Like if you tell somebody, a friend of yours or whatever, hey, I'm HIV positive, but I'm well controlled. Of course, that's a mouthful. Right? It would be easier to tell them I once had HIV, but now I'm cured, right? That would be a little bit easier for them to understand. But it's somewhat equivalent, isn't it? Right? And yet there's still this fear of HIV, right? Even sometimes amongst doctors. Like there's certain doctors that are, uncomfortable treating people with HIV, or dentists. I was blown away as I've been learning this. Um, you know, um, so tell me the full breadth of, sort of the impact of stigma.
Yeah, I think we have to remember, stigma impacts everyone, and I think stigma impacts everyone differently. So it makes me think, we use one word, we frame it as stigma, but when we truly like peel the level back, stigma can be felt in multiple ways, right? So an individual living with HIV can feel internalized stigma. So, like a deeper shame or lesser value of oneself, right? We also then have anticipated stigma. So, even if I am impacted by HIV, I will begin to think how I would be negatively hurt as a result of stigma, right? And
Right.
then I think the big ones, and this recently came out in a few administrative comments, there's also enacted stigma, right? And that is stigma built into the laws and policies that we live in every day of the week. So that's like HIV criminalization, and the fact that more than 33 states across our nation still criminalize people living with HIV around like the intent or whether or not they disclose their status to someone, right? So like, so we have one word, a six-letter word, but these are huge concepts that we just do not talk about when we think about stigma. You know,
Yeah.
so it's
No,
big.
I mean, that's a great description of it, right? Because you really did, you outlined this in a very logical way. There is, multiple levels to this, and let's take them one at a time, right? Because I could imagine, right? People take a pill and they feel somehow inferior, right? Everybody has some virus. Many of the viruses that are in people's body are way more dangerous to the people around them than HIV if you're well controlled, right? But at the same time, HIV has just got this, kind of heaviness to it for 40 years. And I think also, it takes a long time to get over the 80s. The 80s were an epidemic where people were just dying horrible, horrible deaths before we had any effective treatment. So, that's very interesting to sort of look at just that element. And as you talk to people, like in your social media and stuff like that, are you seeing that? Is that what kind of percentage of people are like have that question in their head?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, those thoughts and images, that showed itself during the early '80s, early '90s, are really still prominent in communities, especially as go deeper into certain communities. So like I live in the deep South. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. Um, yes, Atlanta is, we like to say we're the capital of the South, but depending on what community, stigma is still felt. In Georgia, across the state, we still see more than 800 folks dying as a result of HIV or AIDS.
Yeah.
So like, take a pause, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, those folks are individuals who are less likely to be tested immediately or even access care. You know,
Right.
so going back to your statement of many people take a medication for something, right? But if the medication that you are taking has all this heavy guilt, fear, discrimination, violence, trauma connected to it,
Mhm.
reduces the likelihood of you going to your pharmacy to pick the medication up,
Yeah.
taking the medication home, and then swallowing the medication every day of the
Yeah.
week. Like it's one thing to have medicine, but if you're not taking the medicine, how do you become better? Right? So again, like these are the multiple pieces. I think that as we are creating interventions and new techniques to keep our communities healthy, we may not always have these types of conversations, but community the people who are vulnerable and the people who need something like this the most, they think about this all the time. They think about this in the middle of the night. They think about this when they're on the bus going to their doctor's office. And they're thinking about it as they're sitting, waiting to get their teeth cleaned at the dental office, knowing that, oh, at some point in time, I had to check that box on this eligibility form saying that I have HIV/AIDS, and now I have to explain it. So I think these are the things that we have to remember as we continue, towards a cure, and just, the best treatment for everyone impacted by HIV.
That you kind of bring up a couple of things in there. You kind of slid into the anticipation part, which is kind of the next level of it, but also access to care. Some communities are very proactive when it comes to embracing everybody with HIV, because they recognize that it's a benefit to society to help these folks to control their viremia and to live normal lives, right? It's a productivity issue. It has an impact on society when we allow people to exist without access to care. It's not free. I mean, these people that start to get symptoms of HIV, where do they show up? Probably the ER, right?
Yes.
This is a very expensive way to treat the symptoms of HIV, right? And so, like in New York, I was talking to Guy Anthony. I don't know if you're familiar with him,
I know
but
Guy's a good friend.
oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. So anyway, I was talking to him, and he said, yeah, he moved from the South up to New York, and the first thing they did were like, oh, you're HIV positive. Here's a place to live. Here's a bus pass. Here's food stamps. And here's a doctor that can treat you. Right? Why? Because that actually makes not just human sense, like to have empathy with somebody's burden. We do this in so many different ways, right? Somebody's in a wheelchair. We're like, yeah, we should have ramps for them, right? You know, so somebody's carrying the burden of the stigma or of the, just the responsibility. Really, it's a responsibility, right? Of being HIV positive. Yeah, why wouldn't we build them ramps? The ramps are housing, food, transportation, and a doctor.
Yes.
And guess what? All of a sudden that person's a productive member of society, right? And they just feel better. And,
Yes.
and that's really interesting, like to be in a community like that. So is Georgia different? I mean, here you are, you're a young, gay, black man out, HIV positive. So Atlanta seems to be kind of an oasis in the South, actually. Maybe the capital of the South, but then don't vote that way, right? So I'm thinking it's probably a more liberal environment than, say, if you Macon County, or I don't even, Macon County's just from the old movies. I don't even know. For all I know, that's the most progressive part of the state at this point. But personally, tell me, what's it like? And then spread it out a little bit, to the whole South. And what's it like? HIV positive is one aspect, but being a young black gay man, right? What is the combination, right? It's not their favorite thing down south, as far as I know. But how's it impact you?
Yeah, I think you are hitting on all of those important things, Jeff. We think about it, as a nerd that I am. We think about it through intersectionality, or the multiple points that make up you, and whether or not it helps you to be healthier or it hurts you. So living across the South, and I think the South can be grouped, truly being less than an opportune place in comparison to like your New York, like your San Francisco. especially when we think about the wraparound services, you
Yeah.
know. So everything that you mentioned, those if I do not have to worry about housing, if I do not have to worry about transportation, if I do not have to worry about food, the likelihood of me staying in HIV care to remain undetectable and be the healthiest that I can be increases significantly. You know,
Yeah.
so when we see that those wraparound services are not offered in the same manner, especially across the South, it's no wonder why we see more than half of new HIV diagnoses occur through the South. It's no wonder when we look at viral suppression, less than 1 in 2, are still showing signs that they have detectable virus. It's no wonder why we see like lower health outcomes connected to mental health as well. So it's a holistic approach. It's human centered. So we really cannot have a conversation of just about HIV. HIV is one of a handful of things, that creates health across community levels. So we really have to, think about what can we do, not only as folks living with HIV, advocates, finding the best cure and finding the best technologies for medication, but also, our larger community members. What can we all do to create a more safer, wholer environment for people to thrive?
Yeah. I mean, that is really interesting to me as you're speaking about it. It's almost like the results of what's going on in the South validates the model in New York and California, right? What it says is that, yeah, you can do it better and cheaper and in a more human way altogether. It
Yes.
actually economically pays off, right? New cases are tremendously expensive to society, right? And that's also another thing that I'm thinking about is like, here's a problem with our state system, right? So if you might just choose to move to New York. So New York might take on the burden of this nationally, right? That's puts an undue burden on that area when in fact it's economically viable everywhere, and really every state house should be considering how do we bring that program here, yeah, so that we can go ahead and enjoy the benefits of that.
You're literally becoming a doctoral candidate for a public health degree.
That's
Like,
so funny, which you are, by the
come
way.
on
It's like,
over.
yeah, it's just like, is this your thesis? Like it seems like it should be a thesis topic, right? Statistically and analyze this and economically too. My degree's in economics, so I'm always thinking about
Money. It makes
efficiency.
it makes sense if we can not only prevent comorbidities, ultimately we are saving resources that we can prioritize other places.
Yep.
Those resources can be placed in housing assistance. Those resources can be placed in cure research,
Yeah.
or additional support structures, to keep everyone in the community healthy and thriving. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
you're you're right on, Jeff.
Well, you're never going to find a bigger believer than that than me. And the reason being is like I support universal base income, right? Because look, HIV is just one thing that could keep you from being a good contributor to society, right? If we could establish sort of a baseline where you're going to survive, okay,
Absolutely.
you can be a good citizen. You can start contributing from there. The funny thing is I'm not a believer that when you give those sort of wraparound services or safety net, that people get lazy. Sure, some do, and you can always find the exception that proves the rule, right? If that's what you want to believe, right? But the reality is, if you put this in place, not only for HIV infected individuals, but for everybody within society, you get more economic activity. You get a better society. You eliminate a whole bunch of costs that are unaccounted for because they're not direct costs, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's no, I'm glad to hear that doctoral candidates are thinking this way, and I can't wait to read your thesis. I'm sure it's on something fascinating, and congratulations, by the way.
Thank
You know,
you.
that's major accomplishment. Well, cool. And then there's active stigma. Okay, so what's that about, right? Like you said, you know, the next level up is sort of an issue with, you know, active stigma that, you know, this is different than anticipated. It's different from self-imposed, you know, because of your personal insecurities or whatever, which I think, you know, you getting over that first one is probably at least within your control. And numerous people that I've talked to in the Cure Chronicles have literally found their way out of that thinking, okay, through various methods. So like, I don't know, do you know Rafe Darazi?
No, I don't. I don't. No, I don't think so.
We got one, you know, these things take a little while to get out. So his isn't on the website yet, but
Okay.
you're definitely going to want to tune into that one because, you know, he talks like you do, right?
Okay.
He's just, you know, totally open about this stuff. And, you know, he's found a way to say, you know, it isn't going to dominate my life. I'm going to do what I want to do. Right. And that's a great attitude, but it's not, you know, let's not underestimate how hard it is to get there,
And
you
how
know,
long?
and how long. Yeah. Yeah. But it's the right place to be. The right
Sir.
place to be is to recognize, you know, that we are all equal, you know, from a universal perspective. And you can
Absolutely.
call that religiously, you know, God looks at us, or you can just say that within the universe, we're all the same speck of stardust, right? So any way you want to do it, right? There is no reason to feel lesser, you know. We all deal with our own burdens, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You want to see truly unhappy people, just tune into any reality show, right? And you know, you get a chance to see that stuff, and sometimes, you know, I think that a lot of those reality shows are so that you can feel better, right? Like the average person can feel like, okay, I'm not really missing anything, right? I am equal with these crazies that come from all walks of life. You know, Atlanta being one of them, right? Real Housewives of Atlanta. Yeah.
I haven't watched reality. The question was about
Yeah,
enacted.
let's get back to the
Okay.
subject here.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So thinking about enacted stigma, you know, so again, enacted stigma is truly the policies, laws, procedures that are in place that govern our everyday living, you know. So here at home, you know, there's more than I think there's the last time I looked, there's 33 states, you know, that still have some negative law on the books around living with HIV. So, like an individual, if they are not disclosing their HIV status, they could be prosecuted. You know, they can be sent to jail. They could be fined upwards of, you know, 20 plus thousand dollars. And let's say they win all of those things. Let's say they get out of jail, you know, they could still be labeled as a sexual offender for the rest of their life, you know. Many of these laws were rooted in the really, really earliest days, you know, back in the 80s and 90s when we didn't have modern technology, when we didn't have modern medication to keep people undetectable, you know, and we know that now once someone is undetectable, they are untransmittable, you know, so they cannot transmit the virus to their sexual partners, you know, so we're really
For
just
anyone, right? That's the point, is that casual contact, you know,
correct,
impossible for them to make any
correct.
difference in that, the people around them in their lives. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, so we're really just asking our elected officials, we're asking, you know, our district attorneys, we're asking folks throughout the process of governing the laws and procedures that we live by, you know, to remove these HIV criminalization laws. You know, like HIV should not be criminalized. We do not criminalize individuals with a code. We do not criminalize individuals, you know, living with other health states. So why are we criminalizing individuals living with HIV, right?
It's incredibly ironic when those same states are encouraging people with COVID that can be deadly to go out without, you know, people to go out without masks. and not get vaccinated, right?
You
No,
said it.
this is
Look,
just,
you
yeah,
said it.
it
Okay.
it is ironic. And if we had a different Supreme Court, I'd be like, it's unconstitutional too, but I'm sure they'd find it constitutional if it gets up there. So yeah. Okay, you know a little bit about my politics now, so my apologies for introducing that. Well, yeah, that's really interesting. Now, criminalization is one issue. But what about, just sort of like circulating in society too? Like, okay, so somebody might recognize you from your blog walking down the street. They hopefully run up to you and go, "Thank you for all that great information. It's really helped me in my life and to deal with, my situation." Um, it might not be that way. Two, that person might be, consumed with fear and full of prejudice. Um, you see that too? Is that an active form of the stigma that
Yeah.
impacts people's lives?
Oh yeah, yeah, certainly. And I think that is getting you back towards like that anticipated stigma. I think
Mm,
that definitely happens. And I think it happens more frequently if you are in smaller locales, especially if you may not have an organization or even networks of people living with HIV attempting to change the norms around what it means to be living or what it means to be thriving with HIV. So like one of the things that I've done over my public health career is create different support networks and other initiatives, not only for individuals living with HIV, but also for the community to take the trip with those people living with HIV. So it's ensuring that folks know where to get tested. It's ensuring folks know where to access pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's ensuring folks know where to access mental health programs. Because again, like everything matters when we think about creating a more holistic um, approach for all of us to thrive. You
mhm.
know, I think of a rising tide situation.
Oh,
When
absolutely.
the tide rises, it doesn't only moves the small ships. It moves up the large ships as well.
Right.
So if we can create a more safer, wholer community, everyone will thrive.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
This is why, I probably said this before in the Cure Chronicles or somewhere, but this is why humans dominate the planet, is our ability to collaborate and lift each other up and to create that rising tide that you're talking about, because no other animals can do it, because no other animals have the ability to go ahead and create an abstract idea that touches the logic and also the emotions of people, and then big groups can move mountains, right? And everybody benefits from it. Every big positive thing that has happened in society takes a group of people to do it. And so you are absolutely right that this sort of embracing everybody in society, and for everybody to sort of uh, kind of recreate or refine our trust in one another as Americans, right?
Yes.
And as global citizens, right?
Yes.
That kind of cooperation can do a tremendous amount of good,
Yes.
right? And every time you see people, kind of trying to divide, trying to, stoke our fears, stoke our prejudices, whatever, right? You know it's not going to anything good, right? It usually leads to something that's negative, really, for everybody, you know, not even just for the folks that they're prejudiced against, but we all breathe the same air, we all live on the same planet, right? And there's probably not going to be another one for a while, so we've got a lot of common interests here. So yeah, okay, well that's you know a really interesting sort of spectrum that you talk about in that. Now there's another aspect, because it's not just black people that have AIDS, right? And it's not just gay people that have AIDS, right? But you're black and you're gay, and the I think what a lot of people don't realize, and maybe you can fill us in on the actual numbers here, but although blacks are only, are less than 20% of the population, they're suffering more than 40% of the HIV, right? And I actually think, what's interesting about this is here comes the stigma again. Somebody could be listening to this and go, oh, well, there's a reason for that, right? No, I mean, there's always a reason for everything, but it's not the reason they're thinking. The reason is probably access to care. It's probably trust in the healthcare system. It's
I can
probably,
go home.
what's that?
I can go home. Yes. Yes.
Is that
Those
true? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we
no.
get to a certain point, doesn't mean that, the individuals were wrong. It just means that the conditions were wrong, right? Okay. So, we have to somehow focus on that community to just bring them back to, average at least, right? To full, participation, full options to produce, and to reach their full potential and to help raise that tide, you know.
Yeah. What you're specifically talking about? We have a fancy word for everything. So what you're specifically talking about, Jeff, is called syndemics. So there's multiple layering levels of oppression, or systematic unjust behavior that disadvantages certain populations, right?
Right.
So when you think about the impact of, like you said, not having a doctor office to go to in your neighborhood,
Right.
okay, having to catch the bus an hour and a half from your house to see your physician, not having food to eat with the medication that you had to take. Also, not being in a place where you see other people living with HIV safely and openly. All of these things truly create the the perfect environment for everyone to be unhealthy. You know,
Perfect storm, so to speak. Yeah.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
and again, like going back to those intersections, so like being a young person, being a young black person, being also gay, having not potentially having, a stable place to live. Those things places folks greatest at risk or in the front of the line, for an HIV diagnosis.
Mhm.
It's not sexual proclivities or individuals having multiple sex partners. Like when we control for that, um, infection still doesn't make sense. This past, because I read too much. This past month, the CDC published a report on social determinants of health, and they showed if we provided health access, so health insurance, to young gay men who also are black, we could avert or we could stop 46 infections. Pause. Okay, pause. So if we can stop 46 infections in every city across the South, we literally will be able to see the end of, like, definition wise, an epidemic.
Yeah.
Okay. Especially across this community.
Yeah, that's interesting that the CDC came out with that report recently. So, Bob Redfield is a friend of mine.
Mhm.
He's, was director of the CDC under Trump. And I know that one of the things that he did while he was there is that he looked at the stats and they were able to identify a very small number of counties where 95%, right? Yeah, 95% of the new infections were occurring. And all he was saying is that if we could focus on them and figure out what they need, we could stop the epidemic just that way,
Absolutely.
right? That's amazing. And what they need is the New York plan or the San Francisco plan, right? I think that we could get to that later. But then, when you add up the cost of that, again, it's a mere fraction of the destruction, and that not taking care of it results in, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, but that's good. So the CDC is staying on that. I know that Bob is a deeply spiritual guy, and cares about every life. Of course, he's you know um, worked for the Trump administration, and he is a Republican, but he really is a humanist at his core. That's one of the reasons that I like him so much. But it's tough. It's tough in this environment to get things done. And even though it made it to a speech, I've always wondered, what came after that. Have you seen any activity from the CDC where they're starting to implement any of that stuff? Are they? What else are you aware of that's going on there?
Yeah, so that is actually one of the cornerstones of our prevention and treatment program. So it's known as the Ending the HIV Epidemic Plan. And over the next 10 years, different phases will come online at different points of time. But again, it truly is geared to reduce the number of infections across a 56 counties, okay? And six rural states, Puerto Rico and DC, to reduce HIV. And relatively within the next 10 years, by 2030, we should see more than a 90% reduction of HIV diagnosis. Again, like we're talking about now, it's connected to access to testing. It's connected to ensuring people living with HIV are on their medication and staying on their medication to be undetectable. It's ensuring that we have the best options for pre-exposure prophylaxis to those people who are indicated to use PrEP. Wraparound services like syringe services programs, harm reduction messaging, but also using data in real time, to answer what does a breakout cases look like in, you know, Hines County, Mississippi, versus Williamsburg County, South Carolina. I think you said something really interesting. We if we take a New York plan and shop it around, you know, the New York plan may not be the best for Bibb County, Georgia, right?
Mhm.
However, if we sit down with people in Bibb County and listen to them, we can create a Bibb County plan that will be the best for them. You know, and so it's really being able to have one-on-one and multiple community conversations like we're having today, to ensure that we find the best strategies forward for these neighborhoods that are impacted unjustly by
Yeah,
HIV.
good point. One size doesn't fit all,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
there should be some customization, but I think the core principle of the New York plan makes sense,
yes,
right?
yes,
And that is
absolutely,
that it is cheaper to help these people than it is to let this problem fester, right?
absolutely.
And that is coming out in the stats. And I'm very glad to hear that there's continuing effort on a federal level to make that whole idea, happen.
Yes.
So, but another thing that occurred to me when you were talking about this, right? Because you said, "Oh, real-time data about outbreaks." Isn't that a privacy issue? And then you lump that together with stigma, right? Oh my gosh, like I don't even like telling people what religion I come from, even though I'm not religious, right? Because everybody has an opinion on everything these days. Unmoored in science, technology, or theology for that matter. But at the same time, they still have it. It's a gut reaction to stuff. How are we going to get people to just be, out, just open about it like you are? I mean, it's remarkable. You're sitting here smiling, and you look healthy and happy, and this is how everybody should have an opportunity for this. It's right in, what was it, Declaration of Independence, right? And so, um, the how do we, it's sort of a balance thing. Is this a really tricky situation, or is it like, yeah, no, Jeff, it'll handle itself if we just, if we build it, they will come, right? I don't know. What do you think?
I'm laughing because last week were finals for me, and I recently took a public health ethical course. So like ethics in real time. And I had to write an essay on making HIV data and privacy issues make sense ethically. So your question brings up my final. So I think some of the things that we have to include is ensuring that there's multiple community stakeholders at the table leading the process, right? So oftentimes when we begin to have the conversation of data and security, the room does not look like people who look like me, right? The room is more, maybe the friends of your age, who are more entrenched in the science or more entrenched in, the epidemiology of it all. But I think everyone should be at the table.
Yeah.
I think we have to have a better communication on not only the importance of surveillance or specifically with health, being that these things do go to our health departments just like passively, right? But I think our health departments also have to take the trip, and leave from their locked doors and come back to the community and say, this is some of the data that we receive as a result of laboratory monitoring across the state. As a result of having this data, this is what we're allowed to do as we are creating planning documents, as we're identifying additional resources to keep folks healthy living with HIV, but also to keep folks negative in their communities.
Hey, anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this up? This was really nice of you to spend this much time with me. Any other things on your mind you want to point out? Tell us, where we can find your blog and your website and all that stuff.
Yeah, I say I hide in public. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter under my full name, Daniel Driffin. But I truly think these conversations must continue. I think as we continue to drive towards a world without HIV, all communities number one, all communities need that. You know, I think all communities have to be able to lead culturally, towards that solution. So, if any possible, if you are, as we continue to create solutions, ensure those people who will be using the products, who need the products the most, are there from the beginning. And I think that's the thing I would leave this afternoon with for sure.
Look, I appreciate that input. And I also appreciate that we got into a conversation that was broader than HIV,
Absolutely.
because it doesn't matter whether it's a cure for cancer or the cure for HIV. And cure for cancer is something that we hope cure for HIV will be a stepping stone to,
Yes.
right? But, we want to see the same thing for both of those. We want to see that the people who need it get it, and that their background or their, situations are not a limiting factor in terms of them getting access to these things. There are the
Absolutely.
realities of where we are and how long it takes to get to a better world, but focusing on that better world, and like that really came across in this interview, is important, and it can be productive if you take it seriously. Measure, like you said, measure what's important, and it'll make a difference. So yeah, thanks again for spending this time with us.
Absolutely.
Really
Looking
appreciate
happy.
it. All right, take care.